Decorating Pages podcast presents Production Design Film Study. This class examines Oscar-nominated films spanning a century of cinema. Accomplished professionals in production design will explore and dissect the sets featured in these nominated films and will educate why they were recognized for the design of their time. This class features the films of 1975. And this year's films are reviewed by Kim Wannop, set decorator, and Adam Rowe, production designer. So we jumped a decade to 1975. And
time travel.
Yeah. And I feel like what a difference. I feel like there's a huge difference in the way things were shot.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, the way things are shot, the style of shooting, and I don't know. I thought it was interesting of what a decade can do for you.
It was such a good study in like what progress comes. I almost would say I'm not going to do it, but it would be amazing to then jump to 85 and then 95 and then 2005 and just see, it's a great way to study human culture, American culture, and how we've changed so much. Like what I really am seeing clearly in watching movies, or at least 1965, 1975, is that storytelling has adjusted to be more and more international or more and more global in current market, and almost waters down the like unique story. I mean, I really enjoyed every movie that I watched. If I didn't love it, I still enjoyed the story of it. And I find that current contemporary movie making in the big scale is not as compelling.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying watching older movies than I am watching newer movies, Barbie aside.
Yeah.
Because they're pulling me in and they're telling me a story and they're doing it in ways that settle. I find that current movies use close-up and they use edit, and then scenes are quicker, and they're so worried about audience attention deficit that they change tone or they change things up, where there's something so refreshing about the style of some of these older movies where you sit in them. And yes, they get boring. That does happen. But that's a different kind of entertainment factor that you have to adjust your brain to. I really, truly loved it. And that kind of came out of watching a decade and then another decade.
Yeah. I feel exactly the same way, in the sense that the storytelling is more focused on the story and the writing than now is more like the effects or the acting, or like, I don't know. It's just I think that there were better stories, especially the 70s. I love the 70s movies. I think that's the pinnacle, where everything sort of came together and everything looks better. I don't know. I'm a big fan of the 70s. So I was happy to do this.
I find a lot of now, I only know what I know now because that's the industry that I work in, or what now is what I'm working in. And I find that you sit into any production meeting or any concept meeting and they say, we want something like, and they use an adjacent movie or something. And because I look at these movies and they have their own style, and maybe they were saying, let's make something like, but I watch, for instance, the Hindenburg or Shampoo, and they have their own tone. They seem to stand alone in their own little 2-hour or 3-hour moment, and that's the Hindenburg. And they gave you this movie, and that's what it was. And it wasn't trying to be. Well, then let's start with the Hindenburg. Yeah. I actually think the Hindenburg should have won the Oscar. That is I'll say that right off the bat. I thought the Hindenburg was spectacular.
I actually watched it last because I was like, I don't want to watch this German thing and the Hindenburg. It's going to be depressing. I don't want to watch it. I was in tears by the end of the film. I loved it. I was like, wow. And then I deep dived into the Hindenburg and how many people actually died.
Me too.
Oh my God. I was fantastic. I loved it.
So let's start at the end of the movie. We don't have to go too much in plot because if anybody knows history, they know what happens to the Hindenburg. So it's like watching the Titanic or watching any documentary like about Katrina. Like, what happens, and it's the story that is being told in the lens in which they used to do it. My takeaway was that they made it like a spy movie, and I really liked that. You had the spy movie vibe going on the whole time.
They used actual footage of the Hindenburg exploding intertwined with the movie, and the director made a decision to show the end of the movie in black and white, specifically so it would match the newsreel that they had. which I thought
They
was
wanted to
was
make
great.
the whole movie in black and white, but
Right.
the studio Universal said
He
no.
said no.
And then, we probably read the same article that they grade out the color, so it actually does give you the experience of almost black and white adjacent, I would say. And then the ending with the tragedy that did occur, and then the very end of the movie, they play the real radio footage.
Yeah.
I also cried, and I don't cry at movies very often, but that was so successfully and beautifully done.
So
It
well
was
done.
absolutely wonderful. And then I actually thought that the end of the Titanic, when it's sinking, I felt like James Cameron must have watched the Hindenburg, because I was like, this interesting documentary, and then real life, and then pulling on your heartstrings, and then releasing your heartstrings.
Probably.
That's kind of how that was happening. And then you were watching. They show you footage, and then they kind of pause it for a second, and then a scene continues to play. It's like it almost elongates the tragedy. Like it really, lets you see the scenes that would have been going on at that time.
Oh yeah.
Or in the 30 seconds or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever.
Well,
however long it took.
there was a note that I read that the actual burning of it lasted like 9 seconds, but in the movie it's like 3.5 minutes or something.
Yeah, and I
obviously,
like
but
that it
yeah.
slowed it down.
Yeah.
It was like slow motion, but different than slow motion, because you could see all these scenes that would have happened in that 9 seconds or whatever, and that was what I loved. And then, okay, so that part aside, how gaga were you about the set decoration in the Hindenburg itself?
I was like, wait, this is awesome. I understand why people would want to go up in a balloon, because it was like high style, like almost like a ship. Like it was like Art Deco. It had beautiful wall paintings in their dining room. These little tiny vignettes of I don't know, they look like Dutch paintings on a wall or something. I thought it was fantastic. It was just something I had never thought of. And then they got to decorate it, which I thought was fantastic.
Well, everybody, when the Hindenburg came out, I'm assuming, would have been curious to know what it was. I mean, it's like when the space shuttle, people want to know what's inside. That's just part of our inherent human curiosity. It's like, what's inside Frodo's house? You can't help but wonder. And here is the Hindenburg, and now there's a chance for a movie to show you what it looked like inside, whether it's accurate or not. I was really surprised to read that it was not well received and that it did not do well. It only got 1 star from Roger Ebert or whichever one. But from my point of view, it was one of the best movies I've seen in a while, and I don't know why it resonated so much with me, but I loved it.
I think there is a detail of Anne Bancroft lighting her cigarette with the lighter comes out of the wall. That must have been true. And for me, you're in a gas balloon, and for a lighter to come out of the wall is like, oh yeah, that's how they used to make the baby cages out the window to get fresh air. Things they don't think about. That had to have been true.
She even kind of flippantly says they only give us one of these, and then she pulls it to light her own cigarette.
She pulls it out of the wall to light her cigarette.
And then the kids leaning over when the lightning's going off, and the kids can
the lightning
fall out
storm.
the window.
Wait, I have a note about that lightning storm. Oh, I forget. I forget.
St. Elmo's fire. I didn't know that.
Wait, the Hindenburg model took 3 to 4 months to build. It cost $35,000, which would be $200,000 now. The set of the ship's hull cost $65,000 and was built by 80 men in a total of 70,000 work hours using 8 tons of aluminum, 11,000 yards of muslin, 24,000 feet of cord, and 2 million rivets. A 24-hour guard was put on stage 12 at Universal to guard the set because it was so expensive.
Well, and I read too that they basically worked around the clock because they were pressed up against time, and it took a year of production. I don't know at what point they were building, but there's so many great shots of it too that you get to enjoy, and inside and out. I mean, the technological feats that they had to jump over to show the outside of it floating, and when they get too close to the iceberg, and that whole scene where they're repairing its muslin skin.
That's incredible.
It did kind of make me wonder why the movie didn't do well. Was this movie ahead of its time? Are we stupider? What's going on? Why was this movie not well received? And the fact that still to this day they don't actually know why it blew up, I found to be interesting.
Yeah, there's many conspiracy theories of if the Nazis did it on their own, or it was like, I don't know. There's a lot of conspiracies. The set also collapsed while inspectors were inspecting it, and there were no injuries, but production was halted for a month while they rebuilt some of the set. It cost $15 million to make and was the most expensive film of 1975. It's crazy.
And it didn't make its money back, or did it? Do you know?
I don't think it did.
Well,
this says the budget was 15 million, and then it doesn't even have it on here, but I think I read that too, that it was like a bust. Yeah.
Well, Edward Cafagno and Frank R. McClevey. Hats off, because like, even though the movie wasn't that well done or well received, I thought that scenery was amazing, and it completely, obviously it's a movie about a thing, so the thing better be awesome, and it was.
Yeah. I also agree. After watching it, I was like, whoa, this was, I mean, the build on this is fucking amazing. And then when we compare it to the winner, it is, I don't know, this is like real design or something. I don't know.
I will agree with you that, like, we'll talk about the winner last, obviously, but I felt that this should have won, and there should have almost been no debate. Now, learning more about what did win and how it won, I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. But the Hindenburg really, I think it's sadly, its lead weight was that the movie wasn't received well. Had it been received well and people really got behind it, I could see why it would have won.
Yeah. The Man Who Would Be King is designed by Alexander Tranner and Tony Ingalls, and set decoration by Peter James. Again, a movie I would have never watched. Loved it.
Oh, you did love it. I didn't really love it. I got bored, but I will say hats off to set deck and props, like all the instrumentation and the animals. My God, the animals. There's snakes and scorpions and everything is in it.
I just thought it was something different, and having it being made in the 70s, again, going back to like stories you don't know, and then like they made great stories out of myths or legends or, you know, actual happenings. I thought like just the scenery of it all, like the castles, and then like that room of gold that they go into was fantastic. And then showing all the like shanty towns, like all the poor little like tent places, and then they were in like, I don't know, the Himalayas, or like they were like mountains.
The sense of place and the spirit that they captured, and it wasn't just cliche. Like it did, you really did feel, and there had to have been a Steven Spielberg moment where he watches and goes, "Oh, that's how I want to do
bridge.
Indiana Jones."
Yeah, look at that bridge.
You really see the building blocks for Indiana Jones, and I don't know what this production designer's, you know, heritage or production designers heritage is, but like it's clear that they were very good at sense of place, and they made you feel like you went out of this world. Every time there was a market, they knocked it out of the park. Like all of them were great.
And they had to build that bridge. They built that bridge. They tore it down. Well,
and I read a really interesting article about how Sean Connery is afraid of heights.
Yeah, and he had the stuntman.
Yeah, and the stuntman fell 80 feet.
Yeah.
That's crazy. 80 feet that's what is that? 8 stories?
That's a lot.
I have a hard time looking over 3 stories. 8 stories. That's crazy.
Yeah. I love Sean Connery. I love Michael Keaton is good and bad, but I just thought it was interesting. And again, I think I got to, like, I'm surprised at these movies I never saw and I like.
Well, I actually liked again, it had very good social commentary. Would this movie get made nowadays? I bet not.
No.
Because, you know, it definitely is about the British taking over, and, you know, it's got entitlement. It's got all these things. It's satirizing in a really interesting way. I think the last 45 minutes of the movie were outstanding. It was the like traveling to that kind of made me bored. And I never really understood the contract that they made. Like that felt like a weird part of the story.
Oh, in the beginning when they're talking to that guy. Yeah. We're just going to go. Like we're going to be. So the plot, we should say, is 2 former British soldiers in 1880s India declare to set themselves up as kings in Kazakhstan, a land where no white man has set foot since Alexander the Great. So basically they go in there trying to like pretend that they're gods, or like they believe that the one guy is a god because of like a misunderstanding with an arrow, and they're kings and they're treated like kings, but then one of them gets bored. And I mean, it's directed by John Huston. It's like, it's a good movie, I thought. I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, it had romping adventure and satire were all there. It just, interestingly enough, it didn't nab me. Maybe it was because it was in the shadow of the Hindenburg.
Production design wise, I could see why this would be. It's, you know, they're all over the map. It's India. It's like, I don't know. I thought it's
Yeah, the train
big
station
budget.
scene alone is
Yeah.
worth it. That production design
When
of
he's
that
on
is
the
really
train.
well. And then the train and the fact that there's no glass and like they made everything about that movie is believably out of this world, and that is what I respected the most.
Shampoo.
Okay, Shampoo. I actually texted you after I watched it and was like,
I know, you hated it.
I did, but then I thought about it. It stuck with me. So the movie, when I watched it, I was kind of like ho humming, but I never fast forwarded. I watched every second of it. Do you want to tell the plot before I dive in?
On Election Day 1968, a hairdresser and ladies' man is too busy cutting hair and dealing with various girlfriends and his mistress, whose husband he meets and finds out he is having an affair with.
It's basically a womanizer movie set in LA. And I talked to my friend Vincent Jeffords, who's a production designer. He did Criminal Minds forever, and now he does NCSI Hawaii, or whatever one is in Hawaii. He grew up in this timeline in Brentwood, and he was telling me how much of a love letter it is to locations. And once I kind of thought about it in through that lens, I was like, oh, it really does. It's very cunning. It makes you love Los Angeles, and it shows you a very beautiful lens of Los Angeles. There's no homeless people. There's no graffiti. There's no trash. There's no smog.
What are you talking about? There's plenty of smog. That's what I was going to say. You can't even see out that guy's window when he's in his Wilshire office.
Oh yeah, that's right.
The whole thing is smog.
But they don't You're right. But they're not like dwelling on it. Like they're making LA look beautiful, and the location. Yeah. So here's who wins in the Oscar if they were to win is the location department. I know that the production designer, I'm sure, was collaborating. I'm not saying they weren't, but the locations are spectacular. And you know, the pool that has the jacuzzi and the waterfall, and I just really enjoyed it. But it's very contained. It's not like it's sprawling.
Well, Goldie's house was a set. Let's just
without
that
doubt.
was a set. It's very period. It's white, the white and the yellow, and the Victorian piece throwbacks, and the brass bed, and like it's a time capsule. It's a very good research set, actually. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the salon.
The salon
is the perfect time capsule. It's like of that moment, hot flash at that time.
Ferns, lattice, white brick. There's so many plants in that salon. He actually bumps into one on one of the takes.
Let's talk about that for a second, because there were a couple of times in many of these movies, but that movie particularly, where shit's in the way and the DP doesn't pull it out. And I loved that. There's a couple of times in a couple of movies where something is in the way that's completely blocking the face of the actor or the camera, and it doesn't get moved. Any project I've worked on now, they'd be like, get rid of the coffee table, pull the lamp off, get rid of the plant. It's just like, you just want to slice people's hands off. Be like, just let it be. It feels better that way, in my opinion.
The Carrie Fisher's bedroom with that blue paisley wall, the whole thing is wallpapered, which is another nod to the 70s, I think, even though this is supposed to be 68. And now that I'm thinking about that, I'm like, this is so 70s. How is this? I don't know. But I don't know.
Oh, right. The only thing that makes it period is the election night, which I still don't understand why they did that. Like, that was such a big part of the plot, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything for the plot. It doesn't matter.
I think at the time it did. Like, I was reading a little bit more about it, and it was very social commentary of what happened to Nixon. I don't understand it because I don't know the history of that. But I did love that it was a time capsule. Even his motorcycle and him running through the hills, and Goldie's apartment, which you talked about, there's like 10 lamps in her apartment that I love.
There's great lamps. The fact that
everybody has to keep moving the phone because there's only one phone. I thought that was really clever.
So I think contemporary wise and showing the 1975, it's a good looking movie. I did not like the movie at all.
It's sells LA in such a magical way that I think even to this day, Los Angeles wants to entice you. That's its, New York has its attraction, and Atlanta or Denver, you can pick any city. They all have a PR campaign that's their heritage.
Yeah.
And LA, it's very clear in that movie that it just wants you want to be a part of it,
Yeah. So yeah, the Sunshine Boys. Should we move on?
Yeah, Sunshine Boys.
Sunshine Boys is a vaudeville duo agree to reunite for a television special, but it turns out they can't stand each other. It's a Neil Simon play. He also wrote the screenplay, and it stars Walter Matthau and George Burns. You could totally tell this was a play because the sets are so, everything's set in a set. Like it's, I don't know. They did some exteriors, but not many.
No, you're right. Everything's set in a set. The other thing I really loved about it, which, you could say as production design or not, or set decoration or props, is that pretty much everybody's doing something. Even in the advertisement agency, everybody's got a thing to do. And I love that in movies because, resets are difficult. They take time. People make a sandwich. You got to reset the sandwich.
Yeah.
People make coffee. They're always moving around. They're always reading the newspaper. They're always smoking a cigarette. They're always reading a book. They're moving things, which I loved. I loved that about the movie because it makes it tangible and relatable. But you're right. It's very, very setty and it feels that way. But set decorator, I can see why they were nominated. The layering that's going on in the apartment.
Marvin March, who is a fantastic, amazing set decorator who died a couple years ago. Yeah. I loved Walter Matthau's. It's this New York apartment. Has every, flyer of every show he ever has somewhere, or some telegram he got, or like an old prop is over there, and, the blankets on the sofa. Like he's an old man who's lived in this apartment forever. And it's just a chunk full of his own history and character. I thought it was great. I thought it was great. I thought the agency was great with that oval arch. I don't know if that's a location. That's a location? Is that what you said?
Oh no, I don't know that. I was just going to say I noticed that as well.
Yeah.
It was a nice signature. The audience needs to know where they are. Little moments like that.
Yeah.
You go like, "Oh, where am I? I'm in a fancy office." That kind of thing.
I thought when they went to do the television show together, and then like the set build was even good, just to show like the viewer like the behind the scenes of the camera. Their teeny tiny dressing room, I thought was really good. What else? Matthew.
Really get to enjoy the George Burns' character's space that well. Like it's clearly a location, and there's almost nothing. To me, there was almost nothing about it that it defined him. I mean, granted, he was living with his daughter, but you get to go to. They make fun of New Jersey or the Bronx, right? New Jersey.
Living in
you don't really get that joke because they mention it a bunch of times. But even the way that Walter Matthau's character's pictures are hung shows you that the set decorating team was very tuned into how they were going to do this, because they're kind of wacky and the frames don't match and a little bit off, and they had to smack somebody's hand to keep from straightening things out because it's almost like the apartment's almost feeling like it's sinking at certain parts, which I love.
There's they also got to shoot in the Friars Club, the real Friars Club in New York.
Which is the TV set? No,
it's where the nephew goes to try to convince his uncle to do the show.
Oh yeah, yeah, they're playing cards.
Yeah.
That is a great set too.
No, yeah, I mean, again, there was a lot of ferns, there was a lot of plants and everything around.
But it's so. My last note on it was like, great movie, not amazing, not the Hindenburg.
Not the Hindenburg. It was George Burns' comeback movie. Walter Matthau is 55 and 80, and George Burns is 80.
That's wild. Of course they are.
In 1975, he was 80.
He must have grayed Walter Matthau's hair down. It was interesting to read who was originally supposed to be cast. There was a bunch of different people they tried to get to those roles.
Yeah. It was good. I mean, I feel like I have seen that movie before, or parts of it before, but never saw the whole thing. And it's good. It's a different type of comedy. Like, it is a throwback, and it is a good it is a good little movie, I thought. So
Yeah, I would say Saturday night, Friday night, looking for something enjoyable. I laughed out loud a few
yeah.
times.
Oh yeah.
Will laugh out loud. Walter Matthau, but it was like, oh, he got typecast because grumpier old men and the
Yeah.
odd couple, like that just becomes his thing for a while.
Yeah. So let's talk about the winner. The winner for production design was Barry Lyndon, and that was production designer Ken Adam and Roy Walker, and set decorator Vernon Dixon. I have never liked this movie. I did not want to rewatch it again. And I found myself actually liking it more than I used to, but I'm a Kubrick fan. I'm not into this movie.
Yeah, what I liked about it was seeing that Stanley Kubrick could do this movie.
Yeah.
Comparing it to The Shining or Clockwork Orange, like, it's awesome to see range, because as an artist, as we both are, producers often want to typecast you and they want to say, oh, that's what this person does. And here's a director who did something so different and they made it their own. I would say that I was not really sure about it either. I was not excited about watching it. First of all, it's way too long.
Yeah.
I did say eat your heart out locations, because you get to see a ton of stuff. And I'm sure you looked up on Wikipedia that it was a challenge. They tried to shoot it in Ireland, and then...
Yeah, they had to keep moving locations. They had to reshoot stuff. It took over 300 days of filming. It had 2 major shutdowns because of, like, the Irish war that was going. They had to move locations. They had to move out of the country, I think. So,
but the thing that I love the most is that they were able to connect to NASA somehow and use these really specialty lenses that had to be modified to shoot natural light, candlelit, and I think that's what ultimately made it win the Oscar. It was the production designer Ken Adams who convinced Stanley Kubrick to move to Ireland and not shoot it in England. And the rooms are amazing. I mean, you just love seeing all the rooms. You just love it. That is the highlight of the movie. Is just seeing these outrageous rooms.
Yeah, these beautiful rooms. It's like you're at Versailles. It's like small versions of Versailles, but they're huge.
And there's this one mirror that gets used in 2 different sets that's like, it's got to be 25 feet tall, continuous mirror. And it's just like, as a person who goes into beautiful rooms and says, okay, grips, we're going to be in here, I would have been like, please don't break the mirror. Please don't break it. Don't try to gimbal it. Just leave the mirror.
Don't gimbal it. This movie is about an Irish rogue who wins the heart of a rich woman and assumes her dead husband's aristocratic position in 18th century England. They only cast Ryan O'Neal because he had come off of like Love Story and they thought it would be a big hit. The movie cost $11 million and only made $234,000. Ever.
It's because it's News Fest, yeah.
Ever.
But I will say the use of the wide shot is really awesome. And that, again, feeds into how this movie won an Oscar for that. Interesting. So it bombed.
Yeah.
And yet it wins an Oscar for production design. That fascinates me.
Yeah. Yeah, no electrical lighting was used. They were only candlelit scenes. They were custom-made candles. Each candle had 3 wicks, which I know that now because I've had to do that. And which the 3 wicks result in a much brighter blaze, but it also burns quicker, just so if anybody knows. I loved looking at all the chandeliers with the candles. I mean, it's scary to me, but it's such a period thing when you see that and you're like, oh my gosh, they had to lower these chandeliers to put the candles on and pull them back up. Like, it's
this
crazy.
Movie definitely had stuff in the way of actors and in the way of the camera, and I loved it every second of it. The camera would go behind something or hide, and it wasn't, to me, always done about tone. Sometimes you make a camera half hidden so it looks like you're voyeuring, so you're looking at someone behind something. That wasn't what this was doing. That this was just like getting you into a sense of space of this room or beautiful composition.
Yeah, I mean, the camera work is phenomenal. Did it win for cinematography? Let me look up.
300 days of filming. Wow, that's a long time for this movie because it's a lot of people sitting and talking.
And I know, yes, it won for cinematography, John Alcott. I also think that Ryan O'Neal loses his accent here and there. Like, I was laughing out loud of, like, he's not even paying attention. He's got, like, one job.
He does go in and outy. And they put a lot of stock in his beautiful face, but even that wears out after a while. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we need something else going on here.
I don't know if I have any other notes. I mean, it was the only Best Picture nominee that year to also be nominated for original song score, adaptation score, costume design, and art direction. This Ken is it? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Finish.
The
Sorry.
production designer Ken Adams also did Doctor Strangelove. He has won a previous Oscar for The Madness of King George. Or he also won for Madness of King George, which was 1994. He also has a ADG Lifetime Achievement Award for the 007 series that he did.
That's Ken Adams.
Yeah.
So all this, just to recap, audience at home, Barry Lyndon, the Hindenburg, the man who would be king, Shampoo, and the Sunshine Boys, there to me was such an obvious scale difference. I mean, obviously the Hindenburg, we've talked about it, we loved it, but it's such a bigger movie than any of these other ones. So it is very interesting to me that it didn't win, because it's in a league of its own when it comes to scale of scenery versus what the other ones were.
But if you also consider that in this year, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Funny Lady, The Four Musketeers, and Day of the Locusts were also out. Like, Sunshine Boys and not Funny Lady? Do you know what I mean?
That's a good point. That is a very good point. I shouldn't disqualify The Man Who Would Be King, because that does have a lot of scale. I would say that is equal in scale, trying to compare apples to apples. But you're right, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest not getting in there because that had such a style to it.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of shocking to me. I mean, I only looked at pictures of Day of the Locust. It looked a big scale. But Cuckoo, Funny Lady, and Four Musketeers. Well, Four Musketeers was a big scale too. Like, I don't know. It's funny how things get nominated sometimes.
It is, and so much of it, I mean, we both know, sadly, is related to PR and just how well something catches traction. Like, I use Emily in Paris as a good example, because I liked season 1. And it didn't really get a lot of attention. And then, now it's being nominated for things and it's getting a lot more attention. But it took 2 or 3 seasons. Things We Do in the Shadow similarly. Like,
yes.
It takes a while for some of these things to catch on. I still cannot believe that Severance, is it?
Yeah.
The Apple. How did that not get nominated for an Emmy?
Where is it?
It blows my mind. It's so well done, but that's what happens. People need time to get to things because we're so saturated. That's my theory.
Well, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest won Best Picture that year. And I believe, now usually, which is more modern, the winner of cinematography wins art direction.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But cinematography went to Barry Lyndon, but Cuckoo's Nest was nominated for that too. Yeah. I don't know. It's a good year.